Dapper Labs, the creators of the Flow blockchain, also the creators of NBA Top Shot, made some news this morning on CoinDesk by announcing that they were launching a Flow native stablecoin called FUSD. But that's not the news. Let me tell you what the news is. The news is that this is the first token on Flow that exists similar to how ERC-20 tokens exist on Ethereum, which could become really interesting for development efforts on this speedy base layer going forward. I'm going to toss this. Who am I going to toss this to? I'm going to toss this to David. David, so this is in the base layer wars narrative, something that's near and dear to my heart. Adding this functionality for people to do all sorts of crazy things on Flow beyond just NFTs, beyond just cool video highlights of NBA players, is potentially really interesting, and I wanted you to take.
Yeah, and this is really, really great from sort of a strategic perspective, right? And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, this is the only example I can think of a company and a base layer that has a product first and then is leveraging that product to expand what their blockchain does. Because Top Shot is obviously huge, but there's not a whole lot else going on Flow right now. But they're using that, they're deploying the stablecoin, they're adding the ERC-20 functionality. We got to come up with a better term for that, by the way. We can't just call them ERC-20s when they're on a different blockchain. And so for Dapper, I think it's obviously smart. There are, I think, some questions about fragmentation, obviously, and interoperability between all these chains that should be concerning from an ecosystem perspective. But for Dapper, it's great. And also, just to point out, they're also talking about wrapped ETH on Flow, which is at least as important, if not more so, than the token generation. I haven't really thought it through, but that's got some fascinating implications.
Yeah, I'd say just the knock.
So it's really a strategic play.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the knock on Flow, as you kind of alluded to, is that it's been a very tightly controlled walled garden, right? So I think we're starting to chip away at these walls and potentially see some interesting applications that neither Dapper nor anyone else on that network at the moment are, well, Dapper is pretty much the only one on the network at that moment. So some interesting applications that are unanticipated and in keeping with past developments on various networks. I'm going to throw this to you, Ben. I mean, I think to me, again, it's sort of this base layer narrative, right? Who's going to be able to bring speedy functionality to some of these DeFi things that have shown promise on Ethereum to date? What's your take on whether or not this is going to entice developers to start building over in that garden?
Yeah, I mean, we see a bunch of other stablecoins in this regard. I believe about the kind of market of those like over 100 billion at this point, which is kind of wild. But it shows that there is like a utility to these things, and they do kind of set things and get it away from the volatility that kind of turns people off, like, running through these gardens in a lot of ways. But David, I think your point was pretty spot on in terms of like, Dapper is Dapper, but Top Shot is the thing. And that's why people are kind of, starting to migrate. I believe we talked previously on the show about some other smaller NFT collections kind of popping over onto the Flow blockchain. I'm curious to see what other kind of app developers come to this, why that's appealing, and maybe if they just want to like hitch their app train to the the wagon that is Top Shot. So I'll be curious to see that. I think the multi-chain aspects that we've discussed too is a big part here. Like we're starting to see a lot of momentum like happen towards that. I've covered like companies that are betting on that as the whole thing for the future, and we're seeing like IBC start to gain more traction among a number of other chains. So once that happens, I think these things are going to get really, really interesting, and those walled gardens are maybe going to cease to be that. I mean, that's a big statement, but I think that is the idea, because then you have so much more optionality, you have so much more interconnectedness and movement between these chains, and that is just a really, really exciting world. So that's kind of my take here is, this is the here and now, that's the future. How we're getting there is going to be really, really cool.
I think Jen had
Zach,
something to throw in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Zach, the story said that by having a stable coin, they hope to entice bigger corporations, mainstream corporations to come over to Flow and build. Do you think that's an enticing enough offer, or is that an indicator of some deals that may be in the pipeline?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I would have to summon the crystal ball, so I have no knowledge of that. But I do know that there's a few like projects on Flow right now, but they're small. I think if Dapper, just given you can imagine that with the success of NBA Top Shot, they are having a lot of big brands and companies come to them and say, "Hey, do this for us." If this is another tool in their toolkit to be like, "Okay, cool. Like we're not going to do this for you, but here's some tools for you to build something potentially on your own." Like maybe that's part of the thinking, but really, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see if this does lead to a Cambrian moment of a Cambrian explosion of DApps on Flow, so that
And
it
they
becomes
just
more than
closed-
just the NFT thing.
And they just recently closed another huge funding round, right, Zach? And, I know that VCs sort of like to have their companies that they fund sort of talk to each other. So that might be data points to keep watching here.